Imagine a battlefield where the air shakes from explosions, metal screams against metal, and every soldier hides behind something solid because even a second in the open can mean the end. Now imagine, in the middle of all this chaos, one man stepping forward holding not a rifle, not a submachine gun, not grenades, but a long, shining sword. A real steel sword that catches the light like a flash of lightning. It sounds impossible, right? Almost like a scene from a fantasy movie accidentally dropped into real history. But this moment wasn't fiction. It was the beginning of one of the most unbelievable true stories of World War II. This is the story of Jack Churchill, better known as Mad Jack, a man whose courage didn't just stand out, it ripped through the expectations of modern warfare. This man used a sword, a longbow, and a set of bagpipes in an age ruled by tanks, aircraft, and automatic fire. And somehow, instead of being overwhelmed, he shaped missions, inspired soldiers, and confused enemies so deeply that some surrendered the moment they saw him. His entire life feels like a myth, but it happened. Every part of it is grounded in real reports, official records, and eyewitness accounts. Jack was born in 1906, far before anyone could imagine how brutal the world was about to become. As a child, he showed signs of unusual discipline and unusual taste. While most kids played with toys, Jack practiced archery, learned old fighting techniques, and trained in music that came from centuries-old traditions. He wasn't interested in being ordinary. He was interested in being prepared, being skilled, and being completely himself. As he grew up, his personality sharpened. Calm, focused, slightly unpredictable. The kind of man you would watch out of the corner of your eye because you weren't sure what surprising thing he might do next. He entered the British Army and served with dedication, but his path changed forever when World War II erupted. Instead of letting the modern age erase the traditions he loved, Jack combined the two. He carried a sword in real battle. He kept his longbow ready. He treated courage as a weapon. While others trusted technology, Jack trusted instinct. Then came 1940, a moment that would shock everyone around him. During a mission in France, Jack didn't raise his rifle when enemy troops approached. Instead, he reached for his bow. Soldiers around him froze, unable to process what he was doing. But Jack moved with precision. He drew the arrow back, aimed calmly, and released. That arrow became the first confirmed longbow kill of the entire war. Think about that. In a conflict powered by aircraft, artillery, and thousands of bullets per minute, a man used a medieval weapon and succeeded. The men around him didn't know whether to be amazed or confused. But this was Jack's strength, unpredictability. He understood something powerful. The mind of the enemy is the real battlefield. When you do something unexpected, the enemy hesitates, and hesitation is deadly. Jack didn't try to copy modern tactics. He used the oldest psychological trick in the world, shock. His sword wasn't just for decoration. It was a functional, sharpened tool he used in close combat. When Jack charged, the blade flashed like a signal that something ancient and unstoppable had entered the field. And soldiers, friend and foe, felt it. Some said he looked like a warrior pulled out of time. Others said he moved with a strange calm that didn't match the battlefield. But everyone felt the effect he created. He shifted the rhythm of fights. He broke patterns. He turned predictable moments into chaos that benefited his side. What made Jack different wasn't the sword itself. It was the mindset behind it. He believed deeply that mental strength outweighed fear, that courage could destabilize an enemy more effectively than weapons, and that boldness was a strategy. While others tried to blend into modern tactics, Jack stood out intentionally. He understood something most soldiers never fully grasp. War is also theater, and the person who controls the scene controls the outcome. His reputation grew quickly. Some called him brilliant. Some whispered that he was reckless. Some simply watched him with quiet awe. But nobody doubted his impact. Jack didn't try to convince anyone to fight like him. He simply lived by his own principles. And those principles carried him through missions that shaped entire operations. But everything you've heard so far is only the introduction to what made him legendary. Because soon Jack would step into a mission so daring, so intense, and so completely unique that it would mark him forever as the man who used a sword in World War II. And won. The night before, Operation Archery looked calm, almost peaceful. But every soldier on that small transport boat felt the tension tightening around them. The sea was dark, the sky low, and the air so cold it stung the skin. But one figure stood completely steady: Jack Churchill, his sword hanging by his side like it belonged there more than any modern weapon. Other soldiers checked radios, ammunition, and gear. Jack checked nothing. He simply adjusted the grip of his blade, as if preparing for a duel from another century. As the boat drifted closer to the Norwegian coast, the cliffs rose like silent giants. Enemy soldiers were up there, guarding the position, waiting for any movement. One mistake, one wrong sound, and the entire mission could collapse before it even began. Yet in this heavy atmosphere, Jack did something nobody expected. He reached into his pack and pulled out his bagpipes. The soldiers next to him widened their eyes, unsure if this was some kind of miscalculation or the beginning of something strange. But Jack didn't hesitate. He positioned the pipes, filled them with air, and began to play a haunting Scottish melody that floated across the freezing water. The sound echoed against the rocks. It shouldn't have been possible. Sound travels fast, alerts enemies, destroys surprise. But that was exactly why Jack played it. He understood the mind better than the battlefield. When something predictable happens, soldiers respond instantly. But when something unusual happens, people freeze. And that tiny pause decides everything. The enemy on the cliffs heard the melody and hesitated. They didn't know if it was a signal, an intimidation tactic, or a distraction. That single hesitation bought precious seconds. When Jack ended the tune, he placed the pipes down gently, almost respectfully. Then he drew his sword, lifted it high, and charged toward the shore the moment the boat hit land. His boots crushed the icy sand. The cold wind whipped across his face. Soldiers behind him rushed forward with rifles, but none matched his speed. Jack sprinted with a kind of wild determination that made even the bravest men question how he moved so fearlessly. The enemy saw movement and opened fire. Bullets cracked into rocks, scattering shards everywhere. But Jack didn't slow. He angled his path perfectly, using natural cover without losing momentum. His sword glinted like a quick spark slicing through the dawn light. When he reached the first enemy post, the soldier guarding it froze. His brain couldn't connect the scene. A sword in a modern war, a man charging like a warrior out of legend. That confusion lasted only a second, but Jack took that second and overpowered the guard with swift, disciplined force. The commandos stormed forward behind him, pushing deeper and deeper into enemy territory. What should have been a brutal, drawn-out confrontation turned into rapid progress. Jack's unpredictability shattered the rhythm of the defenders. They didn't know if more sword-wielding soldiers were coming. They didn't understand the strategy. They couldn't form a stable defense. Then Jack saw the hill above the coastline, a high vantage point controlling the entire area. Taking that hill meant controlling the approach. Losing it meant losing the mission. While others planned carefully, Jack gripped his sword tighter and said calmly, "We move now." Without waiting, he dashed toward the hillside, climbing with pure force even as enemy fire cracked inches from his boots. Halfway up, he nearly slipped on ice but caught himself, refusing to slow. His men followed, inspired simply because he didn't stop. When Jack reached the top, the guard stationed there reacted too late, stunned by the sight of a charging swordsman. Jack disarmed him and secured the post. Suddenly, the entire coastline opened to Allied advantage. From there, the mission shifted completely. Communications collapsed on the enemy side. The commandos advanced through defensive lines faster than predicted. And in official reports that came later, one statement appeared again and again. The psychological shock created by one man carrying a sword accelerated the raid's success. Imagine that. In a war dominated by machinery and firepower, one blade, held by one man, shifted the outcome of an entire operation. But as unbelievable as that was, it still wasn't Jack Churchill's most legendary moment. That moment was waiting in Italy, in a stone outpost where he would walk in with his sword and walk out having captured dozens of armed soldiers. A moment so shocking that even historians today read the report twice. The mountains of Italy stood tall and silent, but beneath that calm landscape lived one of the most dangerous strongholds of the entire region. After Norway, Jack Churchill's reputation had already spread through different units, whispered like a strange legend. Some soldiers said he walked through gunfire untouched. Others claimed he frightened enemies by simply appearing on the battlefield. But nobody expected what he was about to do next. It was 1944. The air in Italy was humid and heavy, carrying the scent of dust, stone, and tension. Jack's unit received a mission: infiltrate a fortified village and capture a key enemy outpost that controlled roads, supply routes, and communication lines. Losing this outpost would weaken enemy defenses heavily. Winning it would open the way for Allied forces. But the mission looked almost impossible. The building was built like a stone maze, filled with guards, heavy weapons, and layered defenses. A direct assault meant certain losses. But Jack didn't want a direct assault. He wanted unpredictability. Before sunrise, the commandos approached the outskirts of the village. Shadows stretched long over the rooftops. Windows glowed faintly from dim lamps inside. And somewhere within that stone fortress, enemy soldiers prepared for whatever the war might throw at them. Just not this. Jack crouched near a wall, surveying the terrain with steady eyes. He observed guard rotations, listened to footsteps echoing down narrow passages, and studied every angle of attack. And then he whispered something to his men. "When I move, follow. No hesitation." They nodded, but none knew what he was planning. Suddenly, Jack stood up straight. Without crawling, without hiding, without even waiting for the right moment, he sprinted toward the outpost with his sword strapped tightly at his side. The commandos froze for a split second, shocked that he was charging alone. Then instinct kicked in. They followed, though far behind him, unable to match his speed. The guards at the entrance weren't prepared. When they saw movement, they lifted their rifles. But when they recognized what was coming, a man with a sword running at full speed, they hesitated. That tiny pause was enough for Jack. He closed the distance, moved inside the guard's reach, and took control of the entrance with a single fluid motion. The battlefield rhythm shattered instantly. Jack's unit poured in behind him, fanning into the narrow stone hallways. The outpost's layout was confusing. Small rooms, tight corners, staircases leading into different levels. But Jack moved like he had memorized it long ago. He glided through corridors with quiet precision, his sword drawn, directing hand signals that guided his team like a silent orchestra. Then came the moment historians still struggle to describe. Jack reached an open courtyard in the center of the outpost. The sun had begun to rise, casting gold light across the stone floor. Enemy soldiers rushed into the courtyard, forming a defensive line. They outnumbered Jack's team heavily. Logic said to wait for backup, hide behind cover, and fight carefully. But Jack didn't follow logic. He stepped forward into the open, sword raised, walking calmly toward a group of armed soldiers who could have stopped him instantly. Yet they didn't. The sight was too bizarre, too unexpected. A lone man with a sword stepping forward in a modern war felt like a hallucination, and that confusion was all Jack needed. His men burst into the courtyard from behind just as Jack reached the center. Their rifles fired with precision, their movements synced perfectly with Jack's leadership. The courtyard fell in minutes, but the most unbelievable part was still hidden behind a heavy wooden door at the far end. Jack heard voices, many voices. He approached the door slowly, sword still in hand, and pushed it open. Inside were around 60 armed enemy soldiers packed into the basement room. 60. The moment Jack appeared, they froze. He didn't shout. He didn't fire. He simply held his sword firmly at his side, standing tall and silent. And the soldiers inside, shocked by his presence and believing a much larger force must be behind him, surrendered instantly. One man with a sword captured 60 prisoners. His team arrived moments later and could barely understand what they were seeing. Jack simply nodded and continued moving, as if this was normal. As if capturing an entire outpost with a sword was just another day at work. Official reports confirmed the numbers. Commanders were stunned, and in the village nearby, stories spread fast. Stories of a swordsman who walked straight through fire and chaos and somehow made the impossible look easy. But Italy wasn't the end. Jack Churchill's story was about to take a darker turn, a turn that would test his strength more than any sword fight. A moment where the battlefield didn't decide his future. Captivity did. The mission in Italy turned Jack Churchill into something more than a soldier. He became a symbol, proof that confidence and unpredictability could overpower even the most fortified positions. But the war had one more twist prepared for him, a twist darker, colder, and far more dangerous than anything he had faced with a sword in his hand. This time he would face something no blade could break. Not long after the Italian operation, Jack's unit was assigned to assist resistance forces near Yugoslavia. The terrain there was unforgiving: steep cliffs, deep forests, narrow valleys, and unpredictable coastlines. But Jack didn't fear landscapes. He studied them like puzzles waiting to be solved. The plan was simple on paper: insert by night along a remote coastline, link up with local fighters, and disrupt enemy operations. But wars rarely follow the script. The night they set off was silent, too silent. The sea was black and still. Clouds covered the moon completely, turning the world into a shape without edges. Jack stood at the bow of the small boat, his sword strapped in place, scanning the coast for movement. Behind him, his men whispered final checks, unaware that danger was already waiting. As the boat approached the landing point, the cliffs loomed like giant shadows, and then it happened. Sudden, violent, overwhelming. Enemy forces ambushed from above. Machine gun fire rained down, hitting the water with explosive splashes. Bullets cut through the wooden boat, tearing it apart. Waves rocked violently as the engine died. Men shouted, jumped, swam, tried to reach cover. The whole mission disintegrated in seconds. Jack shouted orders through the chaos, trying to pull his men toward rocks along the shore. But the fire was too intense. The cliffs gave the ambushers a perfect angle. Jack fought until the last possible moment, shielding others, pushing them to safety, but eventually he was overwhelmed, exhausted, and surrounded. For the first time in the war, Jack Churchill was captured. The enemy didn't know what to make of him. They searched him, found his sword, and stared at it in disbelief. Some thought he was a spy disguised as a soldier. Others thought he was a relic from another time. But the truth was far stranger. He was simply himself. Jack was transported to Sachsenhausen, one of the harshest and most heavily guarded camps of the war. Barbed wire fences hummed with electricity. Guard towers watched every corner. Prisoners rarely escaped. Those who tried rarely survived. But Jack wasn't most prisoners. He observed everything: the timing of the lights, the patrol paths, the guard rotations, the weak spots between shadows. He said nothing, showed nothing, but watched everything with a focused calm that confused even the other prisoners. After weeks of silent planning, Jack was ready. One night, when the sky was thick with clouds and the guards were distracted by a distant disturbance, Jack and two prisoners crawled toward the outer fence. The wire buzzed with electricity, enough to kill instantly. But Jack had studied the voltage patterns. He knew the exact moment when the current dropped slightly during generator shifts. With improvised tools made from scraps, he cut through the wire carefully, methodically, without rushing. The gap opened just enough. Jack slipped through first. His companions followed silently. Jack Churchill escaped Sachsenhausen. He didn't stop moving. For days he traveled south, staying hidden during daylight and moving only at night. He crossed forests, creeks, and abandoned fields. Hunger clawed at his strength. Cold winds tore through his thin clothing. His boots wore down, but he kept going, driven by a mindset that refused to bend. Then, deep in the wilderness, a patrol spotted him. Jack didn't fight. There was no chance of winning in that moment. He was exhausted, unarmed, and outnumbered. They captured him again. But this time he was sent to a different camp, one hidden in the remote mountains of the Alps. If Sachsenhausen was harsh, this place was isolation. Snow-covered peaks surrounded the camp. The cold was constant. The world felt far away. Escape seemed impossible. But Jack didn't believe in impossible. Within days, he started planning again. He studied the camp layout, gauged the guards' discipline, and focused on the weak points created by extreme weather. Snowstorms created blind spots. Frozen paths reduced patrol movement. And during one of those storms, Jack made his second escape. This time with two companions, he slipped into the blizzard, disappearing into white silence. The climb through the Alps was brutal. Wind cut like knives. Snow blinded every step. The cold felt like a living thing trying to swallow them whole. But Jack led the way, using instincts sharpened by years of discipline. They crossed ridges, slid down icy slopes, and followed river valleys for miles. Hunger forced them to chew frozen roots. Jack Churchill's return from the Alps felt less like a soldier coming home and more like a legend walking out of a storybook. His uniform was ripped like old canvas, his boots nearly falling apart after days of climbing ice-covered slopes, and his hands were bruised purple from freezing winds. Yet the moment he stepped into the Allied camp, his posture was straight, his gaze steady, and his spirit unbroken. Soldiers who saw him didn't believe one man could survive what he had. Officers whispered in disbelief. He escaped Sachsenhausen, then escaped another camp, and crossed the Alps on foot? And Jack, catching his breath, simply said, "Send me back. There's still work to do." But destiny wasn't waiting for him. The world had changed in a single monstrous flash. News rushed across bases like a second shockwave. A weapon had been used in the Pacific, one so devastating it erased entire cities in seconds. The atomic bomb. For the first time, even commanders fell silent. Jack, who believed courage and discipline defined war, watched a new truth unfold. Machines now decided the end. He later said, "If those atomic bombs hadn't been used, I'd have fought the rest of the war with my sword." It wasn't exaggeration. It was his identity, the belief that human skill mattered more than any invention. When the war ended, Jack didn't vanish into quiet retirement. Instead, he transformed into a mentor with the same intensity he carried on battlefields. He joined military training units, shaping young cadets not with lectures but with experience. He took them into rough terrain, dense forests, muddy tracks, icy rivers, steep hills. He believed a soldier's mind must be forged through discomfort, pressure, and unpredictability. Real discipline didn't grow in classrooms, it grew in exhaustion. During long marches, Jack would suddenly stop, sit on a stone, pull out his bagpipes, and play haunting melodies that floated through the trees. The sudden music confused trainees the first time, mesmerized them the second time, and strengthened them the third. Jack believed spirit mattered more than strength. A soldier needed soul, rhythm, and presence, not just muscles and orders. Later, he trained as a parachutist. Even leaping from planes felt natural to him. Officers said he was the calmest man on any aircraft. No hesitation, no fear. Just a quiet readiness, as if he trusted the air itself. Even during peace, he lived with intensity. He didn't believe life should slow down. He believed life should stay sharp. His civilian life remained just as unpredictably bold. When he worked in London, he performed a daily ritual that became something of a mystery among passengers. As the train neared his stop, he slid open the window and tossed his briefcase out onto the grass beside the tracks. Then he stepped off, walked back along the railway casually, picked up the case and continued home. People stared, whispered, guessed reasons. Jack? He simply smiled, as if life should always have an element of surprise. Eventually he moved to the coast, somewhere quiet, where cliffs met roaring waves. He spent his mornings walking along the edges, feeling the wind push against him. Sometimes he played his bagpipes toward the sea, letting the melodies echo across cliffs. His sword hung on the wall of his home, not as a relic of war, but as a symbol of identity. A reminder that courage was personal, not historical. A reminder that unpredictability was a strength, not a flaw. People who met him later in life described him with the same word: presence. He didn't brag about battles. He didn't carry himself like a hero. Yet when he entered a room, conversation softened. People straightened subconsciously. They felt they were standing near someone who had looked fear in the face and walked past it. His calmness wasn't emptiness, it was mastery. Even in old age, his humor remained sharp. He once told a young officer, "Routine is the first enemy you must defeat." To Jack, life wasn't meant to be lived in straight lines. It was meant to have edges, surprises, moments that made the heart wake up. Jack Churchill passed away peacefully in 1996 at the age of 89. But his legacy didn't fade with him. If anything, it grew brighter. People looked back at the man who carried a sword into the deadliest conflict in history and realized his story wasn't about fighting. It was about spirit, about identity, about daring to be different when the world demanded the sameness. His life became proof that courage is timeless, that unpredictability is powerful, that a single human being acting with conviction can bend reality in impossible ways. Jack Churchill's story doesn't survive because he carried a sword into a modern war. It survives because of the message hidden beneath every impossible thing he did. A message stronger than steel, that courage, identity, and unpredictability still matter in a world that pushes everyone toward fear and sameness. His life isn't just about war, it's about the human mind and the strange power that appears when someone decides to live boldly instead of quietly. People imagine Jack as fearless, but the truth was human. He felt danger, pressure, and uncertainty. What made him different was how he handled fear. He didn't let it drive his decisions. He kept it in the background, like a faint noise not worth listening to. That mindset allowed him to remain calm when most froze, whether charging with a sword, escaping prison camps, or crossing mountains. He understood a simple truth. Hesitation collapses everything, but movement creates possibility. That clarity shaped his boldest actions. When Jack stepped into the Italian courtyard surrounded by armed soldiers, he wasn't acting wildly. He was using psychology. Humans freeze when reality breaks expectation. A man holding a sword in a modern war was so unexpected that it crushed the enemy's rhythm. He didn't overpower their weapons. He overpowered their minds. His unpredictability wasn't chaos. It was preparation expressed through courage. And that lesson matters even more today. Modern life is fast, loud, and stressful. People face pressure from all directions: jobs, studies, expectations, fears, comparisons. Most freeze. They wait for perfect timing and perfect conditions. But Jack's story teaches the opposite. Action beats waiting. Courage grows from doing, not thinking. A person who steps forward automatically becomes stronger than those who hesitate. Jack didn't wait for opportunity. He created it from whatever he had. After the war, his mindset didn't fade. People who met Jack later in life said he carried a quiet, grounded aura, the kind that makes a room calmer the moment he entered. He didn't brag or perform. He simply lived with the confidence of someone who had passed through situations that should have ended him. His conversations focused on purpose, rhythm, identity, and being awake to life, not trapped in routine. At his coastal home, Jack kept his sword hanging on the wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder, a symbol of identity, a reminder that fear can be defeated, that difference is power, and that a person's nature should never be hidden to please the world. For him, the sword represented the idea that being fully yourself is the strongest stance you can take. He often said people shouldn't live quietly. He believed life becomes meaningful when you act with intention, when you stop letting fear, comfort, or routine shrink your world. That belief shaped every choice he made, from battlefields to prison escapes to peaceful cliffside walks. Visitors often left his home feeling unexpectedly inspired, not because he gave speeches, but because his presence alone reminded them that life can still be large and brave. He taught without teaching, he showed without explaining. People felt that if Jack could live boldly, so could they. His death in 1996 didn't dim his story, it sharpened it. Historians, soldiers, athletes, and creators began seeing his life as a blueprint, a reminder that identity is stronger than rules, that courage is chosen, and that unpredictability is a weapon. And that is why the world remembers him with a line that sounds unbelievable, but is entirely true. The soldier who used a sword in World War II and won. But the deeper lesson behind that line is far more powerful. He didn't just win battles, he won life by refusing to live small. Most people think Jack Churchill's story ends the moment he puts down his sword. But the truth is that legends don't end where history books stop. They continue in the minds, thoughts, and choices of the people who hear them. And in the years after his death, something unusual began to happen. Jack's story started inspiring not just soldiers or historians, but completely ordinary people. Students, workers, travelers, creators. Anyone who felt trapped inside a life too small for their spirit. Because Jack's journey wasn't only about war, it was about breaking limits, breaking patterns, and breaking the invisible cages people place around themselves. The more people studied his life, the more a strange realization emerged. Jack Churchill didn't survive impossible situations because he was physically stronger than others. He survived because he treated life like a canvas instead of a cage. Where others saw fear, he saw possibility. Where others saw danger, he saw direction. And where others felt trapped, he felt challenged. That shift in perspective became the foundation of what many later called the Churchill principle. The idea that life expands the moment you act with intention, identity, and unpredictability. This principle began appearing unconsciously everywhere. Young cadets studied him to understand resilience. Therapists mentioned him when teaching clients about courage. Writers used him as an example of how characters break expectations. Even athletes admired how he treated pressure, not as an enemy, but as fuel. Without realizing it, people began applying his mindset, taking risks they avoided for years, making decisions they kept postponing, pushing themselves into new challenges simply because they remembered how Jack had acted when fear stood in front of him. As Jack's influence grew, something else became clear. He lived in a way that made the world feel larger. Most people shrink their lives as they grow older, settling for comfort, avoiding discomfort, fearing change. Jack did the opposite. He expanded as he aged. He learned new things, took on new roles, tested new limits. While others retired into routine, Jack retired into exploration. That detail changed how many people saw aging. Instead of slowing down, they chose to grow. Instead of giving up dreams, they pursued them. Jack proved that courage is not tied to young bodies. It is tied to young spirits. And spirits stay young as long as they refuse to surrender to comfort. But there was something even deeper behind his way of living, something few people realized until decades later. Jack understood that identity is the most powerful tool a person can hold. Modern life teaches people to blend in, to follow trends, follow rules, follow expectations. Jack taught the opposite. He believed identity should be sharpened, protected, and expressed fully. That belief turned him into someone unforgettable, because the world never forgets people who live honestly, boldly, and unapologetically. This idea slowly transformed how people approach their lives. Instead of hiding their differences, they began embracing them. Instead of waiting for approval, they began trusting their instincts. Instead of fearing what others would think, they began focusing on what they truly wanted. Jack's life made people realize that the world is shaped not by those who fit in, but by those who stand out. Over time, his story also became a symbol for psychological resilience. Therapists used his escapes as examples of extreme focus under pressure. Motivational speakers used his sword charge as an example of breaking mental barriers. His decision to escape twice from captivity became a lesson in refusing to accept circumstances as final. His calmness under chaos became a lesson in emotional control, and his unpredictable actions became a lesson in strategic thinking, how breaking patterns can win battles long before they begin. But one part of his influence stands above everything else. He gave people permission to believe that extraordinary lives are still possible. Even in a world of routine jobs, digital screens, and repeating days, Jack's story reminded people that life can still feel epic, meaningful, and filled with bold choices. You don't need a battlefield to live boldly. You need intention. You need clarity. You need the courage to act differently when everyone else repeats the same patterns. In the years after his death, letters, articles, and documentaries began repeating the same idea. Jack Churchill lived as if life itself was a mission. Not a mission of violence, but a mission of courage. A mission to show what a human being could be when they refused to shrink under pressure. A mission to prove that unpredictability makes you powerful, not strange. A mission to remind the world that identity, when expressed fully, becomes a force. And that mission still continues through the people who hear his story and decide to change something in their own.